Hello and welcome. You're listening to The Power Reclamation Show, where we explore the mysteries, heartbreaks, and resiliency of the human experience. Together, we'll focus on rewilding ourselves through raising consciousness and dismantling domestication. This is a collective journey of challenging hierarchical systems of power over, as well as our own personal conditioning and limiting belief systems. This show is about embodying the power of love, presence, and our own inner authority. Welcome to the show, Scott. It's so good to have you here today.
Thank you so much, Anne-Marie. It's a real pleasure to be here with you.
I don't even know how we found each other, but however I was directed to your page on Instagram, it has been such a delight to follow you and to feel like one of my favorite things about what you bring is this richness to the conversations about life and death and rebirth and kind of the deeper waters of spiritual realm. And it's been so fun. So
I'm really glad you're enjoying it.
I am. I love your pictures of the skeletons. You always have skulls. I want to ask you about that sometime.
Well, death, bringing death
Yeah.
onto the path. It's rich ground.
It is.
And it's always good to have. It's good to have those visual talismans and reminders.
I know they're visceral.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's no dodging around it, really.
No.
It's present like that.
It's true. That's what I love about the visuals. So I've been sitting with this because I've been really excited to talk with you and where do I want to focus? And at some point, I'd love to talk to you about social justice and police reform. I'd love to talk to you about the power of psychedelics and shifting consciousness. I'd love to talk to you about the richness of going on silent personal retreats. And I also know that you have a book coming out. And so I'd love to talk to you about that at some point. And maybe you want to say something about that right now. Like, what's the name of it? Where are you in the process of it?
Sure. Tentative title is The Awakened Heart, like my Instagram handle. And it's basically a spiritual memoir and intended as a guide to support people that are pretty much already engaged in their own spiritual path, but might be feeling called to try to integrate more than one approach in their spiritual practices. So for me, that's Tibetan Buddhism as my primary spiritual path, and then integrating the Santo Daime, which is the church that uses ayahuasca as a sacrament, and also working with other sacred medicines, and trying to integrate that in a way that's not insincere, in a way that's not bypassing anything to just cherry pick the aspect of the spiritual path that I like or that I find comfortable.
Oh, but that's so much more fun.
Reassuring, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
But I think, so the book came out of both, I think, the path that led me originally to seeking spiritual awakening, seeking an escape from samsara, and my encounter with Tibetan Buddhism, and then this unexpected development of this sacred medicine path and trying to integrate those in a way. It was really challenging for me to navigate that territory. And I think the book was a way of wrestling with those ideas and offering my experience in the hopes that it could help others that are going through the same thing.
It sounds beautiful. So it's really a deeper dive in how you have integrated your spiritual journey and sort of the integration of the plant medicine.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. Well, I want to come back to that. Oh, go ahead.
Well, just where it's at right now, the book's been completed. I was shopping it around to literary agents, looking for a publisher, but I think that I'm going to follow a self-publishing path. So sometime in the next few months, it should be coming out.
Oh, I can't wait. Are you going to have some? Well, you'll have it on Instagram. What's that?
Yeah, for sure. For sure.
Okay. Maybe we can come back and talk about that again sometime soon once it's out.
I'd love to. Yeah.
Okay, great. So where I would love to go today is I find myself so intrigued and curious about the fact that you are a retired cop. And I don't know if you would call yourself this, but my experience of you is you have become just basically a spiritual teacher. Not
Mm,
sure you would ever use that word, but that's what it feels like to me, is like retired cop turned spiritual teacher. And I have a lot of curiosity about your journey. So what I'd love to do is just focus on you and your hero's journey of awakening and what it's been like for you to open your heart into this infinite realm of love in everything.
mm.
I
That just gives me chills.
was
Um,
watching your face light up. That was amazing. Yeah,
yeah.
what's
Yeah. Thank you.
happening for you?
I'd love to talk about that. I think it's
Okay.
so important and it's so universal. Although my experience is unique to me,
Yeah.
that sort of template of encountering the dark side of human existence and trying to find a way to cope with that, and not just cope with it, but to turn it into the richest ground for awakening. That's a universal
Yes.
drive, a universal experience.
Yeah.
Um, but it definitely, for me, I entered through the gate of suffering
Hmm.
for sure.
Absolutely. Me too. Infinite
It's a great
suffering.
gate, you know.
I
It,
know.
it welcomes
Yep.
everyone.
It sure
No one's turned
does.
away.
No, those doors are always
um,
open.
yeah, so I was. It's not that I wasn't ever a spiritual person
Hmm.
or an artistic person or a weirdo. I've always been that. So in some ways, entering the police life was a little bit out of character for me. Although
Ah,
my dad was a cop and I grew up with him as my hero figure.
okay.
So it's something it was always in my mind, but I didn't know that I would pursue that.
Mm.
Um, but I did. And it was great. It was super, super wonderful, really necessary for me to develop as a whole human being. I think I was kind of not hard enough,
Hard
not
or heart?
hard.
Hard. Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. I was
Yeah.
soft and
Hmm.
I was super flexible and super go with the flow. And I didn't have a lot of personal power.
Mm.
Um, and I think initially that was one of the biggest challenges is trying to wield power as someone who wasn't familiar with it. And that took a lot of learning, but I had a lot of help.
Uh-huh.
Um, and I think initially that job just lit me up. I loved it. It was super interesting, super fascinating to be on the spot with people that are having their worst moments when the blood and smoke is still in the air. And you're not just there as a witness, right? You're there as a primary actor. You're
Right.
trying to establish some control over the situation, mitigate the damage that's being done or has been done, treat the victims, and apprehend the wrongdoers. It's super rich ground. It's heroic ground.
It
There's no
is.
way around it. And for a long time, I was just really happy at it.
Hmm.
But that life does come with a cost, a psychic and emotional cost.
I
And
bet.
over the years, those costs mounted. And I did not have a good way of coping with all of the negative stuff that I was taking on board.
Hmm.
I thought I had found a pretty good coping mechanism in alcohol.
Oh, yeah. That's a good friend.
Yeah,
I mean, it does take the edge off, but
it does. And it was
yeah.
so reliable,
Right.
so helpful to me initially. It really did allow me to hold some of that darkness and relate to it in a way that I didn't think was terrible.
Hmm.
It sort of gave me access to a place of more capacity and more openness to that darkness. And it was totally socially acceptable, right?
Exactly.
Every
Yes. That's just what you
everyone
do.
drank,
Yeah.
especially cops,
Uh-huh.
and especially that particular flavor of hard bitten, hard charging, cop
Yeah,
that also drinks hard. So
exactly.
it was all
It all
part of the package.
fits.
Yeah, it totally
Yeah.
fit.
Well, so
And
wait,
then,
before you continue, can I just
sure,
back up for a moment?
sure.
There's two key things that I want to come back to because they really caught my attention. One is, can you say a little bit more about this transformation or this bolstering from being so soft that you could actually find some of your power in the
Mm,
training and in the
mm,
process? And then I want to come back to what you just said about the darkness and all of
yeah.
that.
Well, I mean, primarily the the work of a police officer is to wield power, right?
Right.
It's given to us from our society, and we're
Hmm.
tasked with utilizing that power in a beneficial way, in a way that helps the society. So that's that's something that you have to learn how to do. And some guys are natural at it. They come into that field because they are comfortable with power and they like to exercise it. For me, it wasn't like that at all. It was sort of a revelation. It was something that I had to learn step by step. But I did. I'm a good learner. I'm smart, a quick study, and I just found it so amazing, so astounding to step into really unknown experiences and just utilize this power. It wasn't my power. It wasn't my personal power, right? So that was something that I had to discover also, that it was power that was granted to me on a provisional basis.
Right.
But I had to wield it. Like, you
Yeah.
can't refuse to wield it. You
No.
you have to do it.
Hmm.
So yeah, that was an exercise in learning how to do that, how to do it effectively, how to do it um, in the fairest way that you're capable of doing, and
Hmm.
then accepting the outcome of that, because it's not predictable, right? You don't know what the outcome of any of those acts is going to be. And sometimes it's what you intended, and sometimes it goes terribly wrong. And you have to hold that.
Hmm. Right. Well, it's such an unknown realm. It's like a spiritual
Mm,
journey in that way. It's like you don't know
very
what's
much
coming at
so.
you and you don't know the outcome. And I wonder, this whole notion of power. I think I posted about this at one point and you responded. I was talking
Mm,
about the distinction between power over and power with.
right.
And, power over being more of the domination power, the kind of control. I'm gonna have you do what I want you to do. It's my agenda or no agenda.
Right.
And the power with is more of a collaborative, seeking to kind of attune to the whole. So I wonder, what kind of schooling did you get in terms of coming from softer into harder power? What taste of both of those worlds did you get as a cop?
Well, I think, in the police academy, they have a really powerful methodology
Hmm.
for bringing you from whatever raw materials you bring into the academy into someone who is capable of wielding power, who has some experience with it. It's now, granted, it's a kind of false experience. It's in a controlled environment, but the stakes are high within that realm. If you don't do well, you get bounced out. And in my academy class, I think we graduated around 50 to 60% of our class. So a lot of people got washed out.
Yeah.
So within that realm, it was very challenging and super stressful. And you had to learn how to do it, or you wouldn't be there very long. So that's the first step. And then when you graduate and come out into police work proper, going into field training, you're working with a seasoned officer, and they go with you and introduce you to these calls one at a time and give you gradually more and more leash,
Mm.
more freedom to explore that, and let you make mistakes and let you figure things out on your own. And then they're there to clean up your little mess.
Right. Part of the
Yeah. So I
territory.
think it's a pretty good methodology. And,
Okay.
um, some people who aren't suited make it out into FTO, into field training, and then they wash out there in a week,
Okay.
a month, or a couple of months, or even at the end of their training. Um, that also has a high loss rate. That
Okay. So there's kind of two
how to
filter
do.
systems.
Yeah, Yeah,
Mhm.
so I think by the time most guys and women are out on the street, they're certainly a far cry from what they started as, and they're pretty good at wielding that power. But
Okay.
then you launch into your real career
Mhm.
and you find yourself, yeah, exploring that as a path, I think.
Absolutely. Or not, and checking out, I
Or
would
not.
imagine.
Yeah.
Like, just
Yeah.
yeah,
I mean, that you can, there are certain types of cops, that aren't comfortable
exactly.
with wielding power and they don't do it. And everything they touch is a mess. And then there's the other end of the bell curve where all they really know how to do is wield that power over, but they don't have the collaborative power with idea. And so
Mhm.
that never gets developed. And they get a lot of complaints, a lot of use of force problems. And everything that they do is really confrontational.
Right.
But the good cops figure that stuff out very quickly. And they're masters at
Mm.
power over when that's necessary, and then
Mhm.
switching as quickly as possible to
Mm.
power with collaborative space. That is where real work can get done.
I've never thought about it that way. It's like it's really training to be a Jedi, like, to be able to have the ability to do power over and then shift to power with takes a great level of consciousness to actually know what's needed and when.
Yeah.
Because sometimes domination is needed, particularly in that situation, if there's danger and people are at threat. So, yeah. So I
Yeah. And
wanna
think about it. These, men and women are going on 10 or 15 or 20 calls a shift.
oh my goodness.
So,
And the
we,
level of cortisol and stress that starts
yeah.
to build. I mean, it's like cortisol stays in the system for 12 hours. So you get dinged on the first one and then you just keep building. I mean,
Yeah.
that's a big
Yeah. It,
thing.
it stays forever. But
Yeah.
you also, if you survive, you really do develop a level of mastery,
Yeah.
or at least you can.
Yeah.
And you become very, very comfortable working in those waters.
Mhm.
Still costs you,
Well, I want to come
it
back to
still
that.
costs you.
That was the second part that caught my attention in your first part of sharing is this dark side and the
Yeah.
psychic drain and the you using alcohol to try to help you cope and how that was effective. But can you say more about this darkness and the process of what that was like for you to manage and learn to cope with all of that?
Mm. Well, it was, in some sense, I understood that that was a big part of police work.
Uh-huh.
And I had watched my dad go through that and deal with it. And it was part of his life and part of who he was. So I absorbed some of that. Um, and I think that I had a little bit of hubris
Mhm.
in the beginning. I really thought I can handle this. I can
Yeah.
just have a really dark sense of humor and laugh it off and make fun of it and drink a little bit and roll. And then, just push down everything that was trying to come up that I didn't want to deal with. Just push it down and lock it up and
Mhm.
roll on to the next
Compartmentalize
thing.
that shit right away.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And that worked for a number of years,
Mhm.
you know. But eventually, I would say 10 years in, I was not a healthy person. I was really damaged.
Say more. Like, what were you noticing? What were you doing?
Well, I hated myself.
Mm.
I hated human beings.
Mm.
I hated our society and our culture.
Mm.
I hated my administration. I hated 90% of the guys that I worked with.
You're painting a
Um,
beautiful picture here.
and I had a functional system of dividing the world into basically assholes
Mhm.
and people that I could ignore. Those
Okay,
were the two categories,
there you go.
right? And for me, like, it's so weird, but police officers became the only people that I could communicate with
Mm.
honestly. because they had the language, they had the same language and the
Right.
same background and experiences. And, you know, I remember times sitting around a coffee table or something with a couple of other detectives talking about our cases or talking about stuff that was bugging us. And, you know, people just at the neighboring tables getting up and leaving.
Really?
Yeah.
This is like in a
We're
public
like,
setting.
yeah. We're like,
Yeah.
you know,
Just
oh,
because
this
the
is not,
material was so dark.
yeah, this is
Yeah.
not suitable for human consumption.
Right. But you were so used to it. It was the water that you swam in.
Yeah, totally. And
Yeah.
there was a sense too of like pride in
Hmm.
being able to navigate those waters
You
and
bet.
being the darkest one that you could be.
Mm.
But when I was alone with myself,
Mm.
I realized that I was completely bereft and adrift and deeply, deeply, deeply unhappy. And I felt broken.
Yeah.
You know, I was overwhelmed by swimming in that water for so long.
Yeah. I noticed listening to you, there's such an impact in my body of just feeling the sheer isolation of that.
Mm.
And then also there's this little window of bonding through like how dark can we be in order to manage this and
And
like the pride of that and what that takes to compartmentalize at
and
that
in a
level.
lot of ways that was essential.
Yeah,
Like
that's
those guys
survival.
that could roll with me
Hmm.
and that were in there with me, we kept each other alive, straight up.
Yeah,
Yeah.
lifeline.
Yeah.
What are you noticing right now talking about it?
Oh, totally physiologically right back into that space.
That's what I was just sensing with you, and like what arises when you think about it right now physiologically.
Well, yeah, my cortisol levels shoot way up, my
Hmm.
heart rate goes way up, my respirations go up,
Yeah.
my body temperature goes up,
Mm.
my muscular tension goes up,
Yeah.
and that sense of guardedness, like those old walls, just
Right.
immediately come back into place.
Hmm. So
But it's
familiar.
also, you know, like that is not so much not a part of my life or my identity anymore. And touching back in with that is like going home in a way. It's a familiar
Mm-hmm.
place, and I don't visit it anymore. But this
Yeah.
conversation has brought me right back to that. And so that's interesting, right? It's not
Hmm.
just dark. It's not just dysfunctional. It's
Yeah.
also um, deeply nourishing to the shadow side, I think. And I think that that's something that fuels me. It's all of that is fuel for my awakening.
Absolutely. It's like the charnel ground in a way,
Yeah,
you
absolutely.
know?
Yeah.
And can you say just a little bit more on like how the darkness actually is nourishment and fuel, like going back to the familiarity of this? Is
Mm.
it about how it keeps you waking up, or is there some other component?
Well, I think that it's it's just as powerful as the light,
Yes.
right? And yet we don't cultivate it in our society.
Hmm.
And our whole mental health paradigm is geared towards getting us out of that shadow side
Completely.
into the light. And the whole new age movement
Mm.
is, you know, out of the shadow and into the light and transforming darkness into light.
I know.
But, you know, that's a dead end street,
Agreed.
totally a dead end street.
I know.
And that baptism of diving into the dark
Mhm.
and finding your way and really relating to it and incorporating it into your being so that it's not something that's just external any more than the light is, right? It's
Mhm.
you.
Mhm.
Um, that's tremendously empowering.
It sure is.
And that it's almost like an inoculation too, because, right?
Uh-huh.
Every minute of the day, something terrible can happen, and our lives can shift on a dime, and we can find ourselves needing to navigate that space. And if you have been inoculated and you've done the work and you welcome that and know it, then it's a lot easier to go back into that space and then come through it,
Mm-hmm.
but it's got to be with, not
That's it.
instead of,
That's it.
totally.
Yeah. It's the real turning towards and embracing.
Yeah.
And I
And
think
I think if I hadn't been exposed to everything that I was exposed to as a cop,
Mhm.
I wouldn't be a spiritual seeker. I wouldn't be where I am right now. I
Say
needed it.
more. Yeah. Can you elaborate on the correlation?
Yeah, I think it gives me capacity,
Mhm.
right?
Mhm.
Like I have way more capacity for the light and for awakening and for um, a, a love, an unconditional love for everything, because I have embraced an unconditional darkness
Mhm.
for everything. So there are no boundaries. There's no
Yeah.
distinction between the dark and the light in a way. They're just, it's a manifestation of a singular force.
Mhm. So in a way, you don't have to compartmentalize anymore because
Not at all.
everything is part of the one many forms of how we manifest, whether it's light or dark.
Yeah, yeah. And those dark passages
Mhm.
give rise to the most abundant growth and joy, deep, pure, true joy.
Yeah.
That it's like that. I don't know that that's possible without the darkness.
And I think that's the biggest limitation of living in our culture is that, to your point earlier, and especially with all the pop psychology and the new age spiritual, they get co-opted. And then
Hmm.
it becomes this don't feel the dark or there's shame. I know for me, I have wrestled with the dark since I was a kid, like really young. And I often would find myself shamed by others for like having these darker,
Mm,
experiences, whether it was depression or feeling, like existential crisis when my brother died when I was a teenager. And I think that like what you're saying feels so important because it seems that our culture would be so different if we could actually do what you're saying and use the darkness in a conscious way to come together and heal and to acknowledge that yes, it's present. So the more that we fight it, the further we turn away from ourselves and the less light we actually genuinely embody and know to be true. That's what it seems like for me.
yeah, I think you're spot on with that.
Mm.
And we don't have, I mean, even within the spiritual realm,
Mm-hmm.
like I'm just imagining a teacher of darkness, right? A coach for,
Right? Oh,
like,
that would be great.
how do we navigate that without turning it into something weird and
Yes.
like the wrong kind
Black
of,
magic.
right? Yeah,
Yeah.
which is not what I'm talking about at all,
No.
but we don't have good examples for navigating that territory. It's very hard to find. And so we're left to do it by ourselves.
Yeah. Which is part of the initiation. It's part of the hero
Absolutely.
or heroine's journey is like, can we turn towards and bring ourselves through? And the power, at least for myself, every time I go through a really dark passage, the level of embodied presence and power that I feel within myself it's accelerated because of having to have thrashed around on my own in there and finding my way through into allowing it and being with it and having it transform me.
Yeah.
So,
That's what gives you power.
right. That's just
I
the
mean, that
power of,
gives you power and wisdom, compassion for yourself
mhm,
and for others.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's hard to see how you can build a really functional human being without that piece of the puzzle.
Agreed. Yeah. It's so wonderful to hear you speak at this level around it. So I want to come back to this piece around you were talking about your view of humanity when you were in that space of just
Mm.
meeting darkness day after day, and how it was just like people are either assholes or people to ignore. That was hilarious filtering system. And now I want to kind of go through, like, clearly you had a rock bottom of some kind somewhere along the way, or
Mm.
maybe many of them. Um, would you be willing to speak about that, and then what helped you come to the other side, and we can start exploring this other aspect of how it's all living in you now?
Sure. I think that as I was reaching my like personal rock bottom and inability to cope with the stresses of that kind of police work, um, our daughter started to get in trouble. She
Okay.
started to drink and use drugs and get arrested. And she very quickly started using methamphetamine and heroin.
Mm,
So that
big.
by itself is enough to dismantle your entire life,
Absolutely.
which it totally did. Um, for me, for my wife, for our daughter. But I was also, dragging around this big bag of shit from my job. And it
Hmm.
was interesting too that our daughter's experience was all mediated through the local police department.
Oh,
These
that's
are guys that I
interesting.
worked with. I was at the DA's office by the later part of that. So our office was prosecuting her, and the cases had to go to the attorney general, and it created a
Wow.
lot of drama.
There's a lot, there's a massive immersion there. There's no
Yeah,
compartmentalizing possible.
yeah, and it was a long duration, you know,
Mm,
from her earliest teenage years, really through her mid 20s.
wow.
So it was a serious immersion into that, a level of darkness that I couldn't even comprehend really.
Mhm.
And I didn't have the tools to deal with just my own personal problem. And then adding, that responsibility to try to mitigate the damage that she was doing to herself and to our little family unit.
Mhm.
Um, yeah, I would say that was a rock bottom that lasted for a long time and manifested in lots of different ways
Mhm.
and sort of rose and fell in intensity.
Okay.
It's
So
always
sort of a
present.
spiking, and
Yeah.
but for a
Stuff.
good 7 years
Yeah.
or so.
Yeah. And so I think that correlated with a real increase in drinking and
Mhm.
then a real increase in suicidality for me, suicidal thoughts
Yeah,
and impulses. And,
makes
I
sense.
was, for a long time, I was really, really angry, really helpless and hopeless
Mhm.
and looking for a way out. And I had a gun
Right.
all the time. So it's just
Wow,
like,
that's loaded.
you know, the the door was right there
Mhm.
every instant.
Mhm.
And I really longed for it.
I bet you did.
I really longed for it because I knew it was 100% reliable. you know,
Mhm. Mhm.
problem solved.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I think that that's where that police work and all of that darkness kept me alive too. I mean, I had cleaned up enough gunshot suicides and been through the aftermath of that, dozens and dozens and dozens of times.
Wow.
So I had a really vivid understanding of exactly what that entailed
Yeah.
and the cost that the family members have to bear.
Oh, you got to bear witness on that over and over
Yeah.
again.
over and over and over again.
Mm.
So for me, although I had those suicidal urges and thoughts, and, you know, kind of perseverated on them for a long time, I also had a really strong stop, a backdrop. I wouldn't actually do it.
Yeah. And you knew that.
And I knew that.
Mm.
But I also knew that it was super dangerous ground because I knew I was drinking too much.
Mm-hmm.
That lowers my impulse control. It's a real easy step when you're, really decompensated to just do something impulsive
Yeah.
like that.
Have a moment. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
But,
So I lived like that for a while.
and did anyone know, or were you kind of in that on your own?
No, yeah, I didn't share that with others.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
It's not something we usually walk around and share with other people very often.
yeah,
You know?
like I knew I needed therapy. I knew I needed professional help, but I also knew that I couldn't keep my job if I did that. I mean, I might be able to technically,
Uh-huh.
right? Like they wouldn't fire me,
Yeah.
but I wouldn't be on the SWAT team. I wouldn't be doing detective work. I wouldn't be doing the kind of work that I wanted to be doing. I'd be safely behind a desk and getting the help. But that was not something that I wanted.
So the system would have corralled you in a different direction.
Well, at least I think that it would have.
Imagine it might have. Yeah.
Yeah. And that was enough to stop me from seeking it out.
Yeah.
But it did, I felt like I could meditate and nobody needed to know about that. And that would help me. So that's when I started looking for a way out that was actually productive and helpful. And that's how I encountered Tibetan Buddhism.
Okay. So how did you first learn about meditation?
Well, I had already known about it and had tried to establish a meditation practice, a number of times over the years, but unsuccessfully.
Mm-hmm.
So I figured I needed some support and a group and some accountability. So I just looked for a Buddhist center where I could do meditation. And I Googled one and found one nearby and started going. And immediately was shifted into a world that was waiting for me that I didn't know.
Yeah. What did you shift into?
Well, I met my first teacher, and that was like banging into your guru, right?
Yeah.
I mean, everything, I was just like, wow, just sitting in front of him, seeing him, having him see me. It opened my heart. It opened my eyes. It opened this vast landscape of, the awakened reality. And it was instantly like obvious to me. Oh, this is it. This is the way out. There's something here. And, I had that powerful impetus of suffering that drove me. I was like, I'm going to do what they say. They say, do this, I'm going to do that. Read this, I'm going to read it. Pray this way, I'm going to pray that way. Yeah. So I bought it hook, line, and sinker. And it saved me.
Yeah, it seems like there's such a mystery, like you've said, that the suffering will bring us to the table, and then what's going to open the door. And so it's like the Matrix. It almost sounds like once you got there, you took the pill and you realized there is literally a whole nother reality that was waiting for you. Yeah. And can you speak to that at all, of like, what was this other reality that you started to tap into?
Yeah, for sure. I started doing the practices. I started sitting meditation. I started doing the readings, going to teachings. And like at first, like everyone, I think you struggle with sitting still, with
mind,
introducing yourself to your mind, and trying to meditate, right?
Yeah, exactly. In
do
quotes.
this thing that can't be done.
Trying to do it right.
But I noticed, after some period of time, I really didn't notice the internal changes first. I noticed that the people around me were not all assholes anymore.
Fascinating.
Like suddenly some nice people started to show up in the landscape.
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's weird. And yeah, eventually I figured it out that, it was my filter that was changing
Yes.
the way that I was seeing the world and relating to the world and to myself. Um, and, I was lucky that I practiced diligently really quickly, and I had a lot of pent up energy that blossomed really, really quickly. So the hook was set really deep and really fast. And I started to taste the benefits, taste the fruits of practice really quickly. And then that just encouraged me to go crazy with it, which is where I am now.
Yes, I was going to ask. Is this your
Yeah.
version of going crazy with it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So this piece around the heart, because
Mm,
I, you mentioned, even just this noticing that your filter started to change just by sitting. I mean, that's what's amazing to me about meditation is it's not about getting somewhere. It's actually what starts to fall away without effort.
yeah.
And sometimes I want to be able to have this more articulate for some of the corporate people that I work with, because it's like meditation is so confusing about what it's really about if we think we have to actually change our mind or not have
Right.
thoughts. It's
Right.
like that was my trap for so long. I'm like, oh, I'm doing this wrong. I'm still thinking. It's like, no, actually, it is that thing about the compassion of calling back and watching and being with what is. But you're talking about the fruition of before long, all of a sudden, your filters were changing and you were
Mm,
experiencing reality and people differently.
yeah.
So let's talk about your heart and this
Mm,
journey of what, going from this place. And I know this, place inside of me of self-hatred and the darkness that I have lived with in different periods of my life, and what it's like to have the heart open, and then
mm.
how different the world looks and feels. So I'd love to hear. Oh, I wish the listeners could see you right now. It's making me tear up. Yeah, I could feel your heart just spilling out right now.
Yeah. Yeah. It was the most unexpected aspect of the spiritual path for me. I think I'm a really uh, intellect first
Mhm.
guy in a lot of ways, and definitely my approach to trying to heal myself was intellectual.
Mhm.
But almost nothing of what I encountered on the path was intellectual, really. I mean,
No.
it's Tibetan Buddhism,
Teachings.
so
Yeah, so there's a lot,
there's
but
a ton of intellectual stuff. And that's great because it kept my intellectual mind completely occupied
same.
while practice generated these effects that happen all by themselves, right?
Yeah.
Doesn't Luckily you don't have to create the effects. You just have to sit down and do the work, and then the effects happen by themselves because of this reliable technology, I guess.
Well said.
And so for me, like the compassion practices,
Mhm.
taking and receiving, giving and taking, Tonglen,
Yes.
um, Chenrezi practice, Avalokiteshvara, the practice of saying Om Mani Padme Hum,
Mm.
and opening your heart to countless sentient beings, not just human beings, but sentient beings from all realms, and your family, your beloved friends, strangers, enemies,
Mhm.
this conscious cultivation of a compassionate connection to them. That is something that I did because I was told to do it, right? That was part of these practices. So I did the visualizations, I said the prayers, I recited them, I did all the practices that I'm supposed to do, but I didn't really do them out of a sense of compassion for others. I did
Mm.
them to save myself, keep
Yes.
myself from killing myself, to
Yes.
find some peace. But those practices did open my heart
Mhm.
completely. And that transformation, it's like it made my personal salvation irrelevant
Mm.
in a way, like fine, whatever. But all these beings, all this love that is my birthright it's my purest expression is to love unconditionally. And what that is, what that means,
Right.
it was completely unexpected. It blindsided me. But once I got a taste for it, uh, I understood it to be the real key to unlocking everything else.
The key was opening your heart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I don't know, it corrects all of the imbalances, all of the veils and obscurations that we carry as human beings, as conditioned beings. It doesn't matter what our familial and social and personal conditionings are. Once the heart has been opened, then it floods over all of those obscurations. And if you allow it to express itself fully and unrestrainedly, those obscurations, it's not that they dissolve completely or disappear completely, but they are no match for the power of the awakened heart, the open heart. And that goes in both directions. It's bi-directional, right? I mean, right? If it comes out of you and through you, the first thing it does is transform you.
Yes.
Before it can even get out beyond your skin.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So, and then, yeah, everything becomes possible. Everything becomes not only possible, but beautiful, inevitable, worthy of worship and praise, adoration, everything, the dark and the light.
Even the darkest parts.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And then you're anchored. You have a ballast that is unshakable.
Yeah.
Totally. It doesn't matter what happens to you after that.
That's true freedom.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's real and it's right here. You know, it's not something that we manufacture or create. It's intrinsic to ourselves and it's intrinsic to the nature of reality itself. So once you open to that, it's sort of like it's inevitable that it keeps expressing itself.
Yeah.
That's my experience anyway.
Yeah. And I'm sitting here, I'm taking it in and thinking to myself, there are so many doorways, you know, like the Buddhist practices that you described, I'm familiar and have done those too. And then there's the psychedelic doorways, and there's just loving another human being that's actually willing to stay vulnerable with you so that you can actually feel your own. And there's so many different ways, but I wonder if people are listening to us right now and they are really struggling with opening their heart, and maybe they have a taste of what we're talking about, maybe they feel skeptical of it, what kind of advice would you give to them? Because as you said, this is not an intellectual thing. It's a turning towards in a way that feels ineffable, but it's real. So is there
Right.
anything that you could point to for someone that was like, I want that?
Yeah, I think for sure. You know, one of the great benefits of the world that we live in is that all of these teachings are available to any of us just by a Google search or, you know, going on our Kindle and getting a book on meditation.
Yeah.
And what I would say is if you're feeling that calling, if you're unhappy with the way that your heart feels right now, and you feel the call to open it, and you know that that might be something that's worthwhile, then pick a book. It doesn't matter. Pick a good teacher from a reliable lineage, read one of their introductory texts, and then do the practice. And you will feel silly.
There
Do
we
it
go.
anyway,
Yes.
right? Allow
Yes.
yourself to doubt it, allow
Uh-huh.
yourself to resist it, allow
Yes.
yourself to hate it, to think it's stupid, and do it anyway. And don't worry about the outcome. Just, you know, view it as paying your dues or whatever. But I guarantee you, if you practiced daily for 20 minutes a day, like it's your job, then after a couple of months, you're going to start to see and feel that opening. You might be lucky, you might be karmically connected to one of those practices, and really, bam, you get transformed immediately. Or it might be a very, very, very gradual process, but it's real. You don't have to make it happen because it's an aspect of reality itself. All you have to do is make yourself available for it to transform you. And that intention alone and the work will 100% get the result.
Right.
And then once you get the first few tastes of that, then you know, like you get a little crumb of something and you, oh, like I didn't make my heart feel this way. I didn't suddenly, create this. This is something real that I found and that changed me, is changing me. Now I want another one. And where does this lead?
Right. Yeah.
And the more, like, that's where we really start to separate, I think, practitioners. Some people get a taste for that and they're like, okay, I'm off to the races. This is the real deal, and all this other stuff is not as important to me. And so those are the people that follow that. They really do blossom. They really do transform.
Yeah.
It's totally, totally available and possible.
Yeah. And
Real.
it's right there. And it's such a mystery as to who's called and why and for how long and what takes us to blossom, and where there's discipline, where the resistance. I mean, I think what you said is so key, is that it's okay to be skeptical, and it's okay to think it's weird, and it's okay to not know if it's going to bring anything, but the suffering is enough that you're willing to do it and stick with it for a certain period of time. And I think that's where accountability and Sangha or a community is so helpful, is just to be able to check in around other people are doing this too. And then you start to feel inspired. At least for me, I start to be inspired by what I'm seeing change in other people.
Huge.
Yeah.
Huge. I mean, the support of the Sangha is, it's so important and vital in the beginning, but it's equally vital and important in the middle
and the end, everywhere in between.
Always, it's just like every other aspect of the path. The Sangha is so rich and so vibrant and so real, and it expresses itself through these myriad faces and souls and encounters. It's an active force that really does support your practice if you're connected to it. If you make that connection intentional, then it's there for you 100%.
Agreed.
In the most unpredictable and wild and true ways.
Exactly. I know when I think about, I know we're coming to the end of our time, but when I think about some of the moments that I have felt the deepest sense of belonging, and that I have felt the most restful with humanity, has been sitting on 30-day silent meditation retreats. No words, but just this sense of all being connected and committed and devoted to understanding and being with how we're wired, and opening our hearts and closing our hearts and being with the whole journey. And doing that with other people has been such a profound part of me healing relational trauma. So Sangha, community, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So just in our final few minutes, I would love to hear you, if there's anything you could speak on, if there are people that listen to this conversation we're having that have teenagers or have people in their lives that go through such a dark night, and what you might suggest for them, for the parents or for the loved ones that are standing by.
Yeah, I would definitely suggest that they don't try to do it alone.
Yeah. Speaking of community.
It's so scalding when your child gets on that path and there's nothing that you can do to protect her, to save her, to turn her away from that. And we're, as parents, we're willing to throw ourselves away to immolate ourselves if that would give our child, the smallest chance of success. So you can't navigate that territory without feeling this existential guilt and dread and horror and shame. And that's not a burden that you should try to bear alone. Tons of support. Find the one that speaks to you, that's tolerable for you, because there's a lot that's intolerable. Right.
Yeah. You have to
There's
find
a lot
the
of
resonance.
well-meaning systems and teachers and therapists that I know when I was going through it, I just couldn't tolerate anything that wasn't right for me.
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah.
So look around and find something that works for you. And it could be another person, it could be a therapist, it could be private study, reading, meditation, exercise, the whole world. There's a million things that you can do, but don't try to do it by yourself. And then also recognize that it's not a problem that you can solve.
Oh, say a little bit more about that.
It's not a problem that you can solve, and there's no way to mitigate the damage. So give that up. It's going to do what it's going to do. And there isn't a right answer. There isn't a right decision to be made. There's no way to get through it without being burned to the ground. So that's the territory that you're in.
Yeah.
And the other thing that took me a really long time to learn is that none of those decisions that you face that so wreck you are ever permanent or lasting in any way. You come back to it again and again and again. The decision to kick your kid out, the decision to call the cops on them, the decision to take them to treatment, the decision to report them as a runaway, all of the million things, drug testing, everything. You have to face those decisions again and again and again and again. So you have the opportunity to do it this way one time, another way the other time, and learn that none of them work. Maybe you'll get lucky, but for a lot of us, there's just nothing that works really for a long time until that person heals themselves. They find whatever it is that they need and they get through their path. And a lot of them do not make it to that, right? We lose a lot of kids. Yeah. My daughter has lost more friends and acquaintances at 27 than I have in my whole life. She's lost way more friends.
Oh, that's tragic.
It's super tragic. So the worst can happen and does with great frequency. So you, as a parent of one of these people, you have to survive. You have to take care of yourself. You have to give compassion to yourself first. Put the mask over your own face first.
Yeah, exactly.
It doesn't feel good to do that.
No, it would feel counterintuitive. Wrong. Exactly.
It is. Yeah, you feel shame, you feel guilt, you feel no peace. Even when you're trying your best to do self-care, it doesn't really feel good.
Yeah.
But you have to recognize that you're in a territory that is not designed for your pleasure. It's not designed for your comfort. It's designed to do something to your soul.
That's the key that I want to extract from what you've said, is that while there's an inherent experience of being completely helpless, is what I'm hearing you say, and that really no matter what you try, you don't know if it's going to be effective, that really ultimately this is about a big surrender to this other soul's journey, and that you're kind of a guardian to the container and holding love and holding yourself together as much as you can. That ultimately, I think what you're saying is that this goes back to using this as fuel for awakening. And
that's reliable. That's something that you can do. right? That's the only thing really that you can do. I mean, you can use it to destroy yourself,
Right.
to
Mm.
as proof that you're not worthy of
Mhm.
existing and that the world is shitty,
Mhm.
or you can use it as fuel for waking up.
Yeah.
And that's a harrowing journey
Oh,
in itself, but
hugely. Yeah.
but it's the one that has meaning.
Yeah. It's another reality,
Yeah.
another option. Okay. All right. Well, final last question. I'd love to just briefly, as we're wrapping up, if you could share 3 of your most treasured gems of wisdom, and you've shared a lot throughout our time together, or just even one, what comes up for you?
I guess for me, there's 2 things. One is that if you feel like the world is not quite right for you, that it should be better in some way, that it should be more joyful and more holy and more sacred and more connected, um, that world exists.
Mm.
It's real. So if you feel that pull, follow that. Follow that with your whole heart,
Mm.
because the destination is real. That's the real world that you were intended to live in, and it's here right now. And then there are a million ways to get there. So
Yeah.
pick one. Pick the one that's right in front of you, the one that's easiest, the one that feels right, and go with it. And within that vessel, do the things that are uncomfortable, do the things that feel awkward, do the things that don't feel good to you, because that is where the transformation happens. It doesn't happen in the things that feel like home, that feel good to you, that feel you already have some mastery over. It's in the wonky, wobbly, weird, frightening places that the real transformation that you need happens. So embrace those aspects of whatever path you're on, and
Great.
you'll taste the fruit.
Yeah. Yeah. And when you say pick one, you're talking about a spiritual path of some kind, or I don't even know if
Yeah,
spiritual is the right word, but a container in
yeah,
which you're guided through a self-exploration process or a discovery process where
yeah.
you
And you
you
don't,
actually are made to feel uncomfortable in certain ways.
yeah. It's
Uh-huh.
something that's beyond your personal preferences,
Hmm.
and you commit to
Yeah.
that, because
Yeah.
that's what works on those blind spots that we have.
That's right. Yeah.
You don't have to stay on one particular path forever, but you have to stay on one particular path for 5 years or 10 years to knock off all the rough spots and to gain access to those hidden things, those aspects of ourselves that we hide from ourselves.
Exactly. The
And
shadow.
then once you get your feet, then you can do whatever you want,
Mhm. Mm.
because
Beautiful.
you're in reality, right?
Right.
You're you're dealing with yourself as a real human being,
Yeah.
and other people exactly as they are, and then the
Mhm.
unfolding moment exactly as it is, without preferences or labels.
Mhm.
That's freedom. That's
That is
fundamental
freedom.
truth.
Yeah. And it's a daily practice. A
Absolutely.
moment, a moment to
Minute by
moment
minute.
practice, I
Yeah.
should say. Yeah. At least for
Yeah.
me.
Yeah. Me too.
Oh, Scott, what a delight to be with you. Thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much, Anne Marie.
Hmm. Can't wait to do this again. Let me know
Yeah.
when
I'm
your book
looking
is
forward
out.
to it. All right. I
Okay.
will do.
All right.
All right.
Take good
Thank you.
care.
Bye bye.
Bye. I hope you enjoyed the show today. If you want more, you can subscribe to this channel. This will automatically queue up the next episode for your listening. If you have a burning question or topic you want to learn more about, please send an email to Ask Anne Marie. The direct link is located in the show notes. And please leave a review. This keeps me inspired and focused to bring you more. If you want to learn more about my work as a power reclamation guide, leadership coach, and organizational culture consultant, you can visit my websites in the notes. Thank you again for joining today.